This is a moment in Jewish history. My name is Ben Bresky, and this week we are going to talk about the Jewish communities of Gush Katif. Now, in two previous podcasts, I spoke about the Jewish communities of Gaza, which went back to the biblical times and through the Middle Ages, and famous rabbis lived there. But after the Six-Day War in 1967, Jewish communities were built in what was called Gush Katif. And with me is Avner Franklin from the Gush Katif Museum, which is located in Jerusalem, and he's going to tell us all about it. Avner, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Nice to be on the show, and we'll hope we'll be able to give a good picture of what was in Gush Katif between 1970 and 2005, approximately.
And what is your role at the Gush Katif Museum, and how did you get involved in this?
I give tours in English and Hebrew. I deal with the finance. We do coordination of groups that come as well. How did I get the job? I went to pension, and then I saw this job was available, and I like to speak to people, and I love the story of Gush Katif. And I've been working here now for about 5 years, 6 years.
And you personally have been to Gush Katif?
I wasn't living there, but I certainly used to visit there once a year with my family. We used to go on vacation there. Beautiful beaches. It was simply a Garden of Eden.
Now, 1967, we had the Six-Day War, and Jewish communities were built there. You mentioned the year 1970, so it took about 3 years for Jewish communities to be built there. Maybe you could tell us that story.
Basically, what happened after the Six-Day War, we got the place called Gush Katif, which is really the Gaza Strip, into our hands. And the government under then was Golda Meir, around about 1970. She said, we're going to do what you call a five-finger plan. The five-finger plan, if you can imagine a hand on the Gaza Strip, on Gush Katif, it's the five fingers are, the first finger is in the north, second is just below Gaza, third is below Darom, the fourth is the bulk area from Deir el-Balach all the way to Rafiah, to Rafah. And the fifth finger, then Sana was in our jurisdiction, was also settlements just below Rafah. The idea of the five-finger plan was wherever there was a finger, they were going to build settlements, Jewish settlements. And at the outset, there were 8,500 people living there. And there were 23 settlements that were planned and built. The main settlement started being built in 1977, and the idea was to settle people there, not only give them reasonable housing, but also give them the chance of doing farming. A lot of the people went into agriculture.
I mentioned in my previous podcast, I believe it's Kfar Darom existed in the 1930s. Did any of these former Jewish residents of Gaza come back decades later?
The residents themselves, I don't know, but we certainly reinstated the settlement called Kfar Darom, which, as you say, does go back. There was another settlement there called Netzarim, which was a military camp, and that was also changed into a settlement. The basic settlements, they started building new settlements in 1977 with Ganei Tal and Netzach Hazari.
And you spoke about agriculture, so I'm imagining a desert in the middle of nowhere, and these people plop down, and maybe you could talk about the success story of what they created.
Can I show you two pictures on the screen now, which will explain what, indoor small, what we're talking about? 1 second. Okay, I don't know if you can see this. Can you see this picture?
It's a desert, a group of people standing in the middle of the desert.
Exactly. This is what Ganei Tal looked like in 1977.
There's nothing there.
Nothing at all, just desert. The same picture was taken maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years, and this is what we had in the exact same space.
I see green grass and trees and a well-maintained home.
And you can see the difference between the two, of course.
So that's a success story.
That's a success story of what we did. How did we get from the desert to the greenery and trees and what have you? So a lot of the religious people will say that this is the result of a blessing from the Lord above. Okay? Obviously, we had to work very, very hard. We had what they call a lot of innovation. Israel is today one of the leading nations in innovation in the world. We have innovations going back to 1948 in the War of Independence, where we had nothing, and slowly we built up to what we are today in Israel. After 76 years, we have a beautiful, beautiful country. And the same thing applies to Gush Katif, to the Gaza Strip, where originally we had to work hard, greenhouses. We started doing hydroponics. We started producing lettuce, bug-free, that we could use to eat. All this was innovation which carried on going and going, and still is in existence today. A lot of these ideas have been adopted by a lot of people all over the world. So the innovation that we had has been given on further and shared with many countries over the world.
I remember going to the Shuk in Jerusalem and seeing advertised Gush Katif lettuce, and the Gush Katif lettuce was considered the best, and that was a selling point.
Right. So the selling point is really the lettuce that you have, the Gush Katif lettuce that you buy today in Machane Yehuda, in the markets. It's called Gush Katif lettuce, but it's not grown today in Gush Katif because we are no longer inhabitants of the place. It's grown locally in another place. Once you've got the idea, once the innovation is passed on, if I'm not mistaken, it's even grown overseas today with the same kind of method, Gush Katif lettuce. And there's also cherry tomatoes, which was in existence, but we really started expanding them. We really started modifying them, and they became a very, very popular vegetable, even eaten today all over the world. That's the cherry tomato.
You mentioned religious people, but maybe you could talk about what kind of people lived in these communities, because it wasn't just religious people, was it?
I'd imagine, I'm not sure of this fact, but imagine 75% were religious and 25% were not religious, but they came there out of the incentive of being able to get reasonably priced homes and also being able to become farmers, go into agriculture. And that's what a lot of them did.
And what other types of jobs and industry was there? Or did people commute?
There are other people who went into farming, but a lot of the people who were white-collar workers worked in their professions, like in Beersheba, different places, even locally. There were teachers there, there were lawyers there were doctors there. There were permanent army people there as well, which is also a profession. And those people were less affected afterwards because the working place was in Beersheba, which certainly wasn't part of the unilateral withdrawal. But the people who were in farms and farming, they suffered terribly afterwards because of the lack of their possibility to get livelihood because farming stopped.
When we think of Gaza today, we think of Gaza City and some of the other cities like Rafah, which is in the news. But how far away were the Jewish communities from these places, and what was the interaction of the Jewish people with the Arab people?
Look, basically, they started building the new settlements in 1977. They never went on to any Arab lands. There were 4 major cities there: Gaza, Deir al-Balach, Khan Yunis, and Rafah. Okay? Wherever these cities were, the settlements were not built there. Settlements were built near them, but not on any Arab lands. And for the first 10 years, there was coexistence between the Arabs living there and all the Jewish settlements. A lot of the Arabs went to work in farming for us, and we could go anywhere. You could go into Gaza City, you could go into Khan Yunis, and there was no problem whatsoever for the first 10 years. After the first 10 years, we go on to the Intifada period, which was the uprising. Intifada in Arabic means uprising. The Arabs started uprising under the directorship of Yasser Arafat in 1987. They started making problems. The terror began and slowly increased more and more and more and more.
And you said that you would go on vacation every year, so that implies there was a hotel and some form of tourist industry. So what was that like for you and your family?
in a place called Neve Dekalim, which was the biggest settlement of 600 families. 3,000 people lived there. They had a five-star hotel called the Hotel Neve Dekalim, a beautiful hotel on the beachfront. They also had bungalows available to people to be able to camp out in certain places. Gush Katif was a very, very popular vacation center at that stage. People would come down. And in the beginning, there was less of a problem. In the beginning, you could drive from Ashkelon, which is just above Gush Katif. You could drive from Ashkelon on the road number 4 all the way through the middle of Gaza City, go all the way down and get to Neve Dekalim. It's one straight road. You would go through the middle of Gaza City, and there were no problems whatsoever till 1987. When the Intifada began, things got worse and worse and worse, steadily worse. And then eventually there was the second Intifada, the second uprising in the year 2000, 2001, which was horrific for a lot of people, for the state of Israel, and also the people, inhabitants living in Gush Katif.
I guess this brings us up to the disengagement of 2005. This week marks the anniversary of the disengagement.
Right. What happened in 2005, Ariel Sharon, who was the prime minister, who loved the settlements always, and basically came up and he said, we are leaving Gush Katif. He had a very small majority agreeing with him in the government. And basically, he gave the order to leave Gush Katif, the unilateral withdrawal, which was to take place on the 15th of August, 2005, 19 years ago. The disengagement began, so to speak, from Ariel Sharon. He gave 3 reasons why he wanted to leave. One was local pressure, one was international pressure, and one was that if he left the area, he'd be able to control the terrorism from without Gush Katif. He tried to do that, and it did not work.
Ariel Sharon, back in the 70s, he helped build Gush Katif in the first place.
Very much so. He was very about, when we spoke about the 5-finger plan, Ariel Sharon was one of the partners of that plan, with Golda Meir and with Yitzhak, Rabin, and Ariel Sharon. So he was very, very for the settlements. He built a lot of places. He was a minister of housing as well. There's also reasons behind the scenes of why he did that.
In 2005, at the disengagement, how many communities were there and how many people would you say were there?
In 2005, there were 23 communities. There were 8,500 inhabitants living in different settlements. 3,000 of them lived in Neve Dekalim. Another 1,500 people came along to identify with the settlers, and they also stayed there. So all in all, the disengagement, they had to move 10,000 people approximately.
Now, in the background of our recording, I can hear people walking around and looking at the things in the museum. So maybe you could describe what's going on in the museum today.
What's going on in the museum today is that we have a lot of interest. A lot of people have expressed more interest now because of the war that's going on. When we talk about the major Arab cities, it's there. That's where we're fighting the war. A lot of people come in. A lot of people come in from overseas as well, visitors who sympathize with who identify, I would rather say, with the problem that we have right now. We've done a lot of interviews. You're not the only one. We've had people from kind of Khadisrate come in. We've had people from all over the world coming in, different reporters. And there generally has been a big interest in Gush Katif and what's going on today.
And I see in the background you have a giant menorah. So maybe you could talk about the things that you have on display.
Okay, now the giant menorah was on top of the synagogue in Netzarim, which is the northern part of Gush Katif. And when they left the area, they took it down from the synagogue and they brought it to the western wall. Here is the wall of the calendar of the dates, going from Isaac, our forefather, who was living in a place called Grar, the river Grar, which is in Gush Katif, going all the way through to 2005. We have many, many pictures here as well. We have a library. We sell stuff as well. This over here, this is the mosaic. It was found in 1960. Egypt in 1960 wanted to do another port in Gaza. They dug down for foundations, and they came across the most amazing piece of mosaic. This is a copy of it, called in American archaeologists, and they said, beyond doubt, that that was a floor of a synagogue dating back to the Byzantine period, 1,500 years ago. It was the floor of a synagogue. They estimated the size of the synagogue to be 600 square meters, which is huge, which proves that there must have been a tremendous community living there as well in the Byzantine period. We have movies in the museum as well. We have a second floor with a three-dimensional exhibition on Bible stories, which keeps the interest of children. And we talk to groups when they come, younger kids, older people, and that's the situation. Why do we call it Gush Katif, by the way?
I don't know. That's a good question.
All right, I'm going to tell you. Gush in Hebrew is a cluster, is a group of settlements. You look at the southern settlements, they're all together. That basically is the cluster. So they call the whole area the cluster, right? Gush. What's Katif? Katif in Hebrew is to harvest, like liktof pairot, is to harvest fruits. So because we were so successful in the industry of agriculture, we called the whole area Gush Katif. So I've taught you something new.
I think that's a good way to end. We've been talking to Avner Franklin of the Gush Katif Museum, which is located in Jerusalem. Any final words you want to share with our audience?
Yes, what I do want to say is as follows. When we captured Gush Katif in the 6-day war, probably took us a half a day to do it, okay? We've been fighting now over 312 days already, and Gush Katif has changed. It wasn't like it was. If you look at Gush Katif or the Gaza Strip, and you not imagine, but that's a fact, that there are 5 stories underneath, like a garage, where you park your cars, 5 stories underneath, which is tunnels, which the Hamas use. You can drive from one side to the other, and they armed to the teeth with a lot of ammunition. Unfortunately, they want to destroy Israel as well. It's not, nothing to hide. But the point is that we have to make sure that the day after the battles end, that the 7th of October will not reoccur, that we will be able to defend ourselves. And I don't know who they're going to put in there to defend us, but the 7th of October cannot take place again. Give you best regards from Jerusalem. Whoever comes to Jerusalem, look us up, come and see us, and I'll be more than happy to give you a guide around the museum. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. This has been Avner Franklin. My name is Ben Bresky. This has been Jewish History Moment, and for more information, you can check out benbresky.substack.com. Thank you for listening, and shalom.